So I don't see any old business on here. So under new business, I'm sure many of you know, we've been working through our bylaws and changes. Doug is going to just do a quick summary for you of those changes. You should have gotten it in your email about 30 days ago. And I know that he also shared the link in a couple other places, so that way you can see those changes as well.
All right, can everybody see my screen?
Yep.
All right, excellent. Okay, so I am not going to really go line by line, but I will just kind of briefly summarize. What we did was we mostly just updated some of the language in the bylaws. As you can see, it hadn't been updated since 2015, so some of the language in here needed to be updated to kind of coincide with the way that, some of the terminology that we use instead of, Michigan Jaycees, JCI Michigan, so on and so forth. We also kind of spelled out some of the exact board positions which hadn't been done, even though we were actually electing to those positions. The other main thing that we did was, let's see here if I can find it. Yeah, like I said, we updated some of the language in a lot of these areas. Instead of CPG, PMG, all of that boring stuff. We decided that we wanted to go ahead and move the date of our elections. So instead of taking place in November, they would now take place the month prior. That way it kind of fits more in line with the local organization training school, or LOTS, for those of you who haven't heard of that. What has been happening the past couple of years is our elections are actually taking place after LOTS. And so generally speaking, now everybody is invited to go to it, but generally speaking, usually the new officers are more inclined to go to that. And if you don't know if you've been elected to a position or not, it's kind of, so we decided to go ahead and change the bylaws to move elections and nominations to a month prior to what they originally were. All right, so like Kimmy mentioned, we originally discussed all of this in January at the January GMM. We did it again, I believe, in February or March. And then we had a Q&A session online where we went over it line by line. We made sure that we had some of our prestigious lawyers, thank you, Jerry, help us out and make sure that everything looked good. We then also went ahead and emailed it out again. And let you guys know when we were going to be voting on it. And so that is what we're going to be doing tonight. In just a moment, if you have not already received an email, you should receive an email asking you to go ahead and vote on either the approval of the changes to the bylaws or not approve them.
Doug, for the you skipped over kind of the board structure really quick.
Okay.
So I just wanted to make sure that you guys know that that isn't taking effect immediately. This is reflecting for January 1st. So for the new board that would get elected. So just so you guys know that piece. All right. So this is my first time doing this virtually, nonetheless. So I would like to entertain a motion to adopt the amendments, proposed amendments to the bylaws.
Yes. Yay. I propose.
Thanks,
I
Jared.
second.
With
I second. It's Becky.
Thanks, Becky. All right.
I'm voting now.
I would like to move to amend the proposed bylaws so that Article 8, Section 3 will read that we are electing the executive vice president and 4 area vice presidents instead of 4 board members.
Oh.
I need a second.
Gotcha.
You can say it.
All right.
I second that.
All right. Doug, do you?
I do not believe, I think we discussed this. We're not accepting further amendments this time around. we would probably open it up to a future amendment after this has been passed. But the way that we did this was we actually already had the special meeting where you could propose amendments 2 or 3 times.
I mean, that's not quite how Parley Pro works, but I'll defer to the chairperson to either call my motion out of order or to entertain it. That's you, Kimmy.
Oh. So Doug, can you pull up that section that he's talking about?
Yeah, let me go ahead and share my screen again. Okay, which section?
Article 8, Part 3.
Okay.
The president and executive vice president and the 4 area vice presidents.
I believe it's phrased like that. Why did we put that instead of vice
I'm
president?
pretty sure the reason we said that is because we're not just electing vice presidents, because like a treasurer or a secretary, they're not considered vice presidents, they're board members. And we could be electing for any of those as well.
Right. We did talk about that.
Yeah.
So then we need 6.
Isn't secretary and treasurer technically appointed?
No, we don't specify who is appointed. That was another thing that we discussed.
We discussed that at the Q&A as well. Yes, that's how it's typically been done, but that's not a rule. The president doesn't have to appoint the secretary and treasurer. They can be people that are voted.
Which is listed in that part that you were talking about. It's listed in section 5, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, right there.
Right, but the way this is set up, the president is going to get to appoint 2 anomalous board members. Because otherwise you're short, right? Because it's a president, an EVP, executive vice president, 4 area VPs, and secretary and treasurer. Was that the goal?
So it could be 4, that's the thing. So we have it here in where it says section 3, 4 board members. And then down here it says shall appoint 2 additional board members. So that way that's 6. That's total.
So 4 VPs plus the secretary and treasurer.
Whichever way they get appointed or elected.
Solves the problem.
Does that make sense, or are we wrong, or?
No, it makes sense, but if it's fine. I'll just withdraw my motion.
Are you guys wanting to fill the board and then amongst yourselves decide who is going to be the area vice presidents and the secretary and treasurer once the board is elected and or filled?
Yes. I believe yes, that was what we had discussed.
Okay.
Right, but in all the proposals and write-ups and discussions I've seen, it was always about defining the 4 roles and letting people be elected into those roles. I mean, otherwise, other than adding an EVP that's elected by the membership, do we need to change all of that?
Okay.
Yeah, I thought that was what we had put in here, was that we were actually electing to the positions. That you would nominate somebody for a position. That was something else that we had discussed, that a couple of people didn't like the idea of like waiting until they had been elected to kind of like pick and choose which position. And so we kind of talked about nominating folks for a position, that they were interested in running for, and then voting them to that position, not picking them after the fact.
So then you would need to specify in Article 8, Section 3, that you're electing the 4 VPs.
It's above, right?
Yeah, Doug, it looked like, I think it's in Article 6 that you mentioned it, where it's specifically.
Okay.
Or right here, you're just passing a lot of it, I think.
Yeah.
Maybe it's 7 or 6 or 7 with the chairman where we're listing the specifics.
Right, you're listing the positions, but you're not defining how they get filled. So they need to be defined as to how they get filled. Technically, if you pass these bylaws and I run for president next year, we could elect 4, I could appoint 2. I could appoint 2 to be lackey number 1 and lackey number 2, and then I still have 2 vacancies on the board that the board could then fill. Because you have 6 defined positions, 7 if you count EVP, but ignoring that one, you have 6 defined positions, but there's no actual specification of how they're filled.
Okay. I see what you're saying.
So can you restate your motion, John?
All right, I will once again move to amend Article 8, Section 3, so that it specifies instead of 4 board members, it's 4 area vice presidents.
Second.
Okay, and I'll entertain that motion.
Okay. So how do we go about voting on that particular amendment separate from everything else? Do we have to actually cancel the vote tonight and redo this again, or?
No, if my motion to amend carries, which we'd all have, everybody here would have to vote on.
Okay.
And we have the quorum for that. Then what is then in front of everybody is what you sent out plus my 4 extra words.
Okay.
So can I ask a question on that?
Yeah.
So if we change it then to 4 vice presidents, then to me that would mean that the 2 people that the president would then appoint would have to be the secretary and treasurer, correct?
They wouldn't have to be. That would be.
Well, that's what it sounds like. If you're saying there will be 4 vice presidents elected, then that automatically covers those.
Right. And then the next amendment would be to change Section 5 to specify secretary and treasurer.
Yeah, but that's what we wanted to avoid.
We want someone, if they want to be secretary or treasurer, that they can be elected to be, and it doesn't have to be an appointed position.
Well, then we need to add more to Section 3 so that they would then be elected. And you would just know that your board now is going to be a president, a chairperson of the board, an executive vice president, 4 area VPs, a secretary, a treasurer, and 2 voting appointments by the president.
So this is Beth. On top of that, I have a question. Where in here, I read this earlier today, where in here does it talk about, I mean, I know he talks about in Section 5 appointments, but where are the appointments of directors?
Well, the president's always had the authority, whether or not it's in here, to appoint non-voting board members. I think that's in a little bit later. That's what directors always were.
Okay, thank you.
Really, you just got to be worried about how you fill your voting positions. I mean, it can all be by appointment. It can be this ad hoc, but if the point was to tighten it up so that people are running for specific positions, we need to make this change and then either add secretary and treasurer to Section 3 and then strike Section 5, or just accept that the president gets 2 appointments of their own and some combination of it.
Right. I think that's what we want, the last part you said.
So we want everybody to be elected and the president's not appointing anybody.
No. We want the president to be able to appoint whoever may have not run for a position. Does that make sense? So say,
Like it's a trophy.
Yeah,
Well, not necessarily, because we could have 7 people run for positions, but only 4
Right.
being voted for. So not necessarily people who haven't run.
yeah, well, that would happen later if there were a vacancy. If nobody ran, if you say in part 3 that we need to elect secretary and treasurer, and then we still allow the president to appoint 2 more, then the president can appoint 2 more, like a technology director and a social media director, and they'd be voting board members. President could pick whatever it is that they do. So I've heard like 3 different goals here for what we want the language to be. So I'm just trying to figure out what that is.
I think we also have to watch the size of the board, of electing the board and enlarging the board. If you add the secretary and treasurer as elected in section 3 and then still allow the president to appoint 2 people, is our board getting too big for the number of members that we have?
Meh.
So with John's motion, it's adding the area vice presidents, correct?
Yeah, to make them specifically elected. Changing section 3 so the area vice presidents are specifically elected.
So right now we will focus directly on that. We've had some discussion. Is there any other discussion that anybody would like to add? So we don't necessarily have our voting set up the way that you have the ballots set up, Doug, with that. So Jerry, what do you suggest would be the best way to gather the votes?
Honestly, may I interject? I feel like at this point, for this particular amendment, we ought to just do ayes or nays.
Yeah, okay. So if you're voting aye, you're voting in favor of the verbiage that John suggested. If you're voting nay, you're voting to keep the verbiage the way that we have it. Is that correct, John?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so all those in favor of the proposed change of the statement saying that it's for area vice presidents, please say aye.
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 Okay, all those opposed? Anybody abstain? All right, so it sounds like that motion has passed. So then, Doug, we would change that portion.
Area vice president.
Yeah.
To the area vice presidents.
I'll have to do it in Word. This is a PDF.
Oh, okay.
You can't edit your video.
All right. So then do we want to define the 2 appointeds or secretary and treasurer, or do we want to add secretary and treasurer as electeds?
I don't think it needs to necessarily be defined, the appointed to be secretary and treasurer.
Right.
There's also been years past where the secretary had also been a VP before too and played 2 roles. So I think that can be played around with. I don't necessarily think they should be elected. Or defined, I should say.
Okay. Is there any further discussion on the amendments that are proposed? Okay. So can I entertain a motion to adopt the proposed amendments with the changes to section 3 that we did?
Aye.
Second.
Okay.
Aye.
Okay,
Aye.
great.
Aye.
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 Okay. So from here, our next step, I believe, would be voting. Am I correct?
I think we just did.
Oh,
Yeah.
everybody adopted? Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Anybody opposed? All right. So looks like our amendments have passed with that change. Thanks for hopping on and voting with us. What did you guys think of the speaker?